When the blood moon rose over New Orleans in the sweltering summer of 1903, something ancient stirred beneath the city's surface. Whispers echoed through the French Quarter of vanished men, clawed shadows, and a name too old to remember. Jacques St. Germain, ageless and elegant, had disappeared. But his hunger had not. As the city trembled on the edge of nightmare, a forgotten protector stepped from the shadows, a man who no longer bore his own name. Tasked with stopping a circle of immortal monsters before they could rise again, he uncovered a secret buried in fire and time. But darkness never dies. Decades later, a young historian stumbles upon a lost journal, and with it, awakens a legend. Some names were never meant to be spoken aloud. But one name is returning, and the night is waiting. The crescent moon loomed over New Orleans, casting a silver light upon the mist-laden streets of the French Quarter. Gas lamps flickered as if whispering secrets to the wind, and shadows danced along the cobblestones, echoing the jazz melodies wafting from a nearby bar. It was the year 1902 when Jacques St. Germain arrived in the city, stepping off the ocean liner like a man stepping between centuries. Elegant, poised, and unnervingly magnetic, Jacques drew attention wherever he went. With pale, aristocratic features and raven black hair slicked back in a style reminiscent of the old European courts, he was a vision of mystery. No one knew the exact reason for his arrival, but his presence felt like something that had been waiting in the wings of New Orleans for a long time. He took up residence in a grand townhouse on Royal Street, a building whose ironwork balconies and tall shuttered windows seemed to embrace the secrets of its new master. Neighbors watched with fascination as he hosted opulent gatherings, where laughter mingled with whispers and the clinking of crystal glasses. Yet, for all their luxury, his soirees were never seen ending. Guests arrived, but no one ever noticed them leave. Rumors began to surface, as they always do in a city like New Orleans. They said Jacques never ate in public, that his wine was darker than blood, and that mirrors seemed reluctant to hold his reflection. Yet his charm was undeniable. Women swooned, men admired him, and society opened its arms to the enigmatic newcomer. He was known to frequent the music halls on Bourbon Street, often alone, always watching. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his voice carried the weight of centuries. He recounted tales of Paris during the reign of Louis XV, of feasts at Versailles, and secret salons hidden beneath the catacombs. The locals chalked it up to theatricality, the indulgence of an eccentric European noble. But others weren't so sure. It was on a warm autumn night that a scream shattered the revelry. A young woman, bloodied and breathless, stumbled onto the sidewalk from an alley near St. Louis Cathedral. Her neck bore 2 deep punctures. She claimed that Jacques St. Germain had lured her into conversation, taken her for a walk, and then attacked her. Panic gripped the city. Police were dispatched. Reporters clamored for the story. Jacques, for his part, did not flee. Instead, he welcomed the authorities into his home with the grace of a host receiving dinner guests. They found no trace of the girl's blood, no evidence of a struggle. Only wine bottles, unopened, and a library filled with ancient texts written in Latin and Old French. The officers left with more questions than answers. But the city would not rest. Whispers turned into accusations. Journalists published his image alongside articles speculating about his lineage and feeding habits. A few brave souls attempted to shadow him at night, but they often lost sight of him only to find him again, standing directly behind them, smiling. The police investigation deepened. Officers began to monitor his townhouse more closely, noting odd patterns, how he never emerged during daylight, how his visitors seemed dazed when they left, if they were seen at all. Some nights, mournful violin strains floated from his open windows, haunting the quarter. And all the while, Jacques St. Germain remained the perfect gentleman, unbothered, undeterred, unchanged. The first blood had been drawn, and New Orleans was awake. The young woman's name was Evangeline Moreau. A seamstress by trade, she lived with her aunt above a cobbler's shop on Dauphine Street. The night she was attacked, she had been returning home from a friend's engagement party, her path lit only by the uncertain flicker of gas lamps and the full moon overhead. Her scream, desperate, primal, brought locals to their windows and policemen to the scene within minutes. She was trembling when the officers found her, blood matting her blouse, her eyes wild with fear. Her story was disjointed but consistent. Jacques St. Germain had offered her a walk in charming conversation. His voice had been melodic, hypnotic even. But as they passed into the quiet of the cathedral alley, everything changed. He smiled, she told Officer Leclerc, the first on the scene. Then I saw his teeth. Not just sharp ... but wrong. Like something pretending to be human. A doctor examined the wounds on her neck. 2 clean punctures, close together. No tearing or bruising around the site. He could not explain it. Too clean, he muttered. Not an animal, not a knife. Almost surgical. News spread faster than the rising fog. By morning, the Times-Picayune had published a column titled Blood on Bourbon, Aristocrat or Monster? The article hinted at dark rituals, old European folklore, and a chilling possibility that New Orleans had welcomed a predator into its heart. The police, unwilling to be seen as idle, assigned Captain Jules Fontenot to lead the investigation. A seasoned man, hardened by years of patrolling the riverfront and breaking up fights on Rampart Street, Fontenot was not one to be taken in by gossip, but he was also no stranger to the strange. He had seen things in the swamps, lights that didn't belong to men, shadows that walked against the wind. Fontenot visited Jacques 3 days after the incident. The townhouse door opened before he could knock. A butler in crisp black attire bowed silently and gestured him in. Jacques was waiting in the parlor, seated in a high-backed velvet chair. He wore a dark blue cravat, and his eyes gleamed with amusement as if he had been expecting the officer. "Captain Fontenot," he said, rising slowly. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Fontenot laid out the accusation. Jacques listened without interruption. When it was over, he chuckled softly. "Poor girl," he said. "She must have been frightened by something else. A bat, perhaps? There are many in this city who would take advantage of a vulnerable woman." Fontenot pressed further, but Jacques produced a list of guests who had been present in his home the night of the attack. Prominent names, all willing to vouch for him. Several testified that he had never left the party. Still, Fontenot was uneasy. He began placing discreet surveillance around the property. A plainclothes man at the corner of Royal and Ursulines. A pair of young officers posted in rotation through the night. He expected to find comings and goings, lovers' trysts, something mundane. But what they recorded only deepened the mystery. Night after night, Jacques was seen entering his home shortly after sunset. He was never seen leaving until well past midnight, and even then, only briefly. Yet strange visitors continued to arrive, some cloaked, some foreign, none of them staying long. The air around the townhouse grew colder with each passing night, and animals, cats, dogs, even birds, began avoiding the block entirely. And then, more women began to speak, quietly, in whispers. They described similar meetings, fleeting moments with a man who made them feel both adored and endangered. One even claimed he had kissed her hand and she had felt a bite, small like the prick of a needle. Captain Fontenot compiled a file thicker than a preacher's Bible, yet every time he moved to act, he hesitated. There was no proof, just shadows and rumors and wounds that could not be explained. But the city was stirring, and Jacques St. Germain, it seemed, had more than one secret to protect. The investigation reached a turning point with the second victim. She was found in the Garden District, sprawled across the mosaic floor of an abandoned greenhouse behind an overgrown estate. Her name was Claudine Rousseau, a writer known for her essays on Creole folklore and forgotten voodoo rites. Her throat bore the same twin punctures as Evangeline Moreau's. Her blood had been drained with unnatural precision. Captain Fontenot was called to the scene personally. He arrived just after dawn, the light golden and gentle, casting long shadows through shattered glass panels. The air smelled of wilted orchids and something metallic beneath, something too familiar now. A leather-bound notebook had been found near the body, open to a page marked with a dried violet. The entry was dated 2 days prior and detailed an interview with an unnamed aristocrat who claimed descent from the courts of Versailles. The last line read, "He watches the city like a lover watches his sleeping bride, with hunger." Fontenot's jaw tightened. Too much aligned. He ordered Rousseau's notebook copied and sent to every station captain and archivist in the precinct. But the deeper they dug into the name Saint Germain, the more disturbing the puzzle became. The original Comte de Saint Germain had appeared in the court of Louis XV in the mid-18th century. He was a polymath, musician, philosopher, and rumored to be immortal. He vanished from public record in 1784, only to be sighted again in London, Vienna, and eventually New Orleans. The resemblance was uncanny. Contemporary portraits mirrored Jacques' features exactly. Fontenot's historian contact at Tulane University, Professor Beauchamp, confirmed it. "This man has not aged a day," Beauchamp said, eyes wide with academic horror. "If these records are true, we are not dealing with a man at all." With mounting dread, Fontenot convened a special task force. Under strict secrecy, they compiled every known account of Jacques St. Germain, from customs ledgers to police interviews to private testimonies. The list of unexplained disappearances near his residence grew longer. Women, mostly, artists, dancers, poets, all people whose absences were easily dismissed. Meanwhile, Jacques remained untouchable, always smiling, always composed. Then came the third incident. A young constable named Henry Duplantis, fresh to the force and eager to prove himself, disobeyed orders and followed Jacques one night. He trailed him from the townhouse to the Mississippi River, through the narrow alleys near the wharves, and into an old warehouse. The officer's last transmission over his police radio was barely a whisper. "He's floating ... I swear it. His eyes ... oh God. His eyes ... When backup arrived, Duplantis was found unconscious in the street. His pulse was shallow, and his eyes would not close. He muttered nonsense in Latin for 3 days before falling silent. He never returned to the force. Rumors could no longer be denied. The newspapers dubbed Jacques le Baiser de la Mort, the kiss of death. Tourists avoided Royal Street. Street preachers shouted warnings about devils and blood drinkers. And still, Jacques walked among them, elegant and untouchable. The mayor, under pressure, urged Fontenot to either arrest the man or drop the investigation. But Fontenot was not finished. He turned his attention to the townhouse itself. If there was any chance of uncovering truth, it lay within those walls. He sought a warrant, but the judges demurred. It would be political suicide, one muttered. Do not provoke what you don't understand. So Fontenot did what desperate men do. He broke the law to enforce it. On a moonless night, he and 2 trusted officers entered the home without permission. What they found beneath the floorboards was only the beginning. The townhouse was silent when Captain Fontenot and his men slipped inside. Midnight had passed, and the thick velvet of night clung to Royal Street like a funeral shroud. They entered through the side entrance, lock expertly picked by Officer Thibodeau, a man with questionable talents and an unshakable sense of loyalty. The interior was pristine. Velvet drapes, antique chandeliers, marble busts of Roman emperors, all immaculate. Yet the air felt too still, too perfect, like a stage set waiting for an actor. They moved through the parlor, library, and hallways without encountering anyone. But it was the dining room that drew Fontenot's attention. A long mahogany table sat at the center, its surface bare except for a crystal decanter filled with what looked unmistakably like blood. Officer Boudreau, the youngest of the 3, whispered a prayer. Behind a cabinet, they found a narrow door leading to the cellar. The steps were stone, steep and slick. The light from their lanterns barely pierced the gloom below. At the bottom, Fontenot discovered a hidden passage, a crude hole behind a wall of empty wine racks. It led to a subchamber, deeper still. And there they found the room. Circular, ancient, carved directly into the earth beneath the foundation. Its walls were covered in sigils, glyphs neither man nor machine could translate. At its center, an altar of blackened stone. Upon it, bloodstains, recent. Surrounding the altar were 7 chairs, each marked with a different symbol. Fontenot touched the arm of one. The wood felt warm. Behind the altar was a chest, iron-bound, locked. Thibodeau pried it open with a crowbar. Inside were vials of blood, labeled with dates and names, and a collection of letters written in archaic French. One letter described a ritual of preservation. Another detailed travel plans from Paris to New Orleans via Havana, referencing a timeline that spanned over 150 years. The last page bore the mark of a fleur-de-lis burned into its corner and a phrase in Latin. Sanguis aeternus, carnis damnatio. Eternal blood, the flesh condemned. Fontenot took the documents and vials. He left the altar untouched. By the time they emerged, the sky had turned a deep indigo. The silence outside was heavier now. No birds sang, no footsteps echoed. Only the wind and the knowledge that they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Later that morning, Fontenot received a visitor. Jacques St. Germain. He arrived unannounced at the precinct, impeccably dressed, holding a small silver cane. His presence turned heads and froze conversation. He approached Fontenot's desk with that same composed smile. "I believe we have unfinished business, Captain," he said. Fontenot stood. He could not summon anger, only unease. "You knew we would find it," he said quietly. Jacques tilted his head. "Of course, but knowledge changes nothing. It is belief that determines fate. And I believe, Captain, that you are running out of time." He left without another word. Minutes later, Fontenot received a telegram from the mayor's office. The investigation was to be closed. Officially. Permanently. Fontenot ignored it. That night, he moved his family out of the city. He knew Jacques would not strike immediately. But the warning had been issued. The hunt had become personal. Within the week, Officer Boudreau vanished. Thibodeau found him in a shallow grave along the levee, bloodless and staring up at a moonless sky. The story was no longer just legend, no longer the echo of European myth or the fever dream of the superstitious. It was here, living, watching, and Jacques St. Germain was at the heart of it. Captain Fontenette's days became shadows of themselves. Officially relieved of duty and cast into quiet retirement, he remained obsessed with the truths buried beneath New Orleans. He rented a modest flat in Faubourg Marigny and filled it with maps, witness testimonies, and sketches of the sigils found beneath Jacques' townhouse. The deeper he went, the clearer it became. This was no isolated case. Saint Germain was not the only one. The 7 chairs around the altar, each with its distinct glyph, pointed to a larger council, perhaps even a brotherhood that extended beyond the city. Fontenette's mind turned towards strange visitors seen at Jacques' estate. He began tracing ship manifests and passenger logs dating back to the late 19th century. There were names that appeared repeatedly, elusive, often undocumented, traveling under aliases. Among them, a countess from Prussia with a taste for opera, a Portuguese botanist who never aged, an Italian maestro who had outlived 3 orchestras. They all came, stayed briefly, and vanished. Fontenette marked their arrivals and found a chilling pattern. Each coincided with a spike in missing persons. Then, the letters started arriving. Handwritten, unsigned, and always delivered by children who claimed to have found them in alleyways or under stairwells. They spoke in riddles, offered warnings, and occasionally, commands. Your flame draws attention. Douse it or be consumed. He is not the last, he is the herald. One night, Fontenette found Thibodeau waiting at his door, pale and soaked in rain. He had not slept in days. They came to my house, he said. Didn't knock. Just stood in the garden, staring through the glass. My boy saw them first. Said one of them had no eyes. Fontenette let him in and locked every door behind him. They sat through the night with pistols drawn and candles flickering low. The following week, a fire broke out at City Hall. Most assumed it was an accident. But among the ash, only one room had been completely gutted, the archive housing birth, death, and immigration records from the late 19th century. Everything pertaining to the era of Jacques' arrival had been destroyed. Fontenette's fury reached a breaking point. He contacted Professor Beauchamp once more, seeking any historical evidence that might survive. Beauchamp, too, had grown fearful. His office at Tulane had been ransacked, his research notes scattered or stolen. But he handed over one final piece, a translated folio, smuggled out of France, containing notes from a secret tribunal held in 1760. The document accused the Comte de Saint Germain of using blood rituals to prolong life, and of conspiring with others to do the same across Europe. They called themselves the Nocturne Circle, Beauchamp whispered, an aristocracy of night. Scattered now, but not destroyed. The pieces were aligning. Fontenette saw it all. A centuries-old cabal of immortals, feeding, watching, influencing history through quiet channels. And in New Orleans, Jacques was their emissary. But Fontenette could not expose the truth alone. He turned to the one person with enough power and enough secrets to act without fear, the voodoo queen of Treme, Maman Colette. She lived on the edge of the bayou in a house that smelled of myrrh and burnt sage. Her eyes were clouded, but her vision was clear. You brought this shadow into the open, Jules, she said, as she read his heart more than his words. And now the night will press harder. She offered him a pact, not protection, but guidance. There were rites older than the blood rituals, forces that could match the nocturne circle if invoked wisely. But it would come at a cost. You must give part of yourself, she warned. A name, a memory, something the spirits will keep in exchange. Fontenette did not hesitate. I give my name. Mama and Colette nodded, and the air shifted. The pact was sealed. The next day, Fontenette vanished from all official records. His name struck from employment rolls, city ledgers, and police rosters. To the city, he had never existed. But to the night, he had become something else. A guardian. A watchman in the dark. The summer of 1903 brought with it a rare blood moon, looming large over New Orleans like an ancient eye reopening. The nights turned hotter, thicker, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Word spread in whispers through the French Quarter. A reckoning was coming. Jacques St. Germain had not been seen for weeks, but strange things stirred. Dogs refused to walk down certain alleys. Priests reported desecrated altars. Fishermen found their nets torn by something with claws. And those sensitive to the old ways, the rootworkers, the bone readers, the dreamwalkers, felt the veil between worlds thinning. In the silence of that unease, a message arrived for Mama and Colette. It was not written but sung, a funeral dirge carried on the lips of a spirit-bound girl who had not spoken in over a year. Her voice broke open the night with words not hers. The circle returns, 7 made one, eternal thirst beneath the sun. Call the guardian, burn the thread, only one must wake the dead. Maman Colette called Fontenette from the shadows. No longer bearing his name, the man was only a presence now, leaner, faster, colder, a remnant of purpose shaped by sacrifice. She tasked him with one final act, to find the 7th chair's heir, the one symbol unaccounted for, the one vampire who had not yet returned to the circle. The trail led him deep into the bayous, into the ruins of a sugar plantation long since abandoned. Beneath the chapel ruins, he found the crypt. And inside, sleeping in stone, was her, the Marchesa de Barolo. Fontenette used a blade of ashwood and salt to carve sigils into the ground. As he completed the final mark, her eyes opened, golden, empty, ancient. "Have you come to kill me?" she asked, her voice like smoke. "No," he said. "I've come to stop the others." The Marchesa rose, brushing off centuries as if they were dust. She stepped into the moonlight and whispered a command to the dark. Ravens rose from the trees. The bayou grew quiet. Time itself trembled. The circle had called, but it had not asked permission. In the city, Jacques reappeared, on the balcony of his townhouse, drink in hand, as if nothing had passed. But his eyes glowed red beneath the moon. The others were with him now. 6 shadows cloaked in centuries. They gathered in the hidden chamber below the house, around the altar Fontenette once discovered. They began to chant. Above them, the blood moon pulsed. Fontenette arrived at the townhouse steps just as the ground began to quake. He carried no weapon. Only a relic Maman Colette had given him, a woven cord soaked in the blood of the innocent, meant to sever the bonds of the eternal. He descended the stairs and faced the circle. Jacques smiled. "You cannot stop what has already begun." Fontenette dropped the relic onto the altar. The chamber roared with wind. The glyphs ignited. One by one, the vampires fell to their knees, their bodies resisting the pull of time now turned against them. Screams filled the air, but it was Jacques' silence that chilled Fontenette most. As the relic burned, the chamber cracked. The earth opened. Fontenette ran. The townhouse collapsed behind him. Fire burst from the foundation. The blood moon dimmed. And for a breathless moment, the city was silent. Dawn came, and with it, a strange calm. No sign of Jacques St. Germain remained, nor the others. Only the ruins of a house that no longer existed in records, only in memory. Fontanet, nameless, unseen, watched from the levee. New Orleans exhaled. The veil closed, but he knew. The night was patient, and it would hunger again. Spring of 1961 brought a different kind of change to New Orleans. Jazz filled the streets, and the old French Quarter gleamed with fresh paint and polished lanterns. But underneath the celebrations of a city reborn, the shadows remembered. In the archives of Tulane University, a young folklore student named Adrienne Leclerc uncovered a sealed journal mislabeled as Property Records, 18th Century. What she read chilled her blood. The book contained sketches of a man in impeccable clothing, ageless, sharp-eyed, always surrounded by candlelight. Marginal notes in Old French referred to him as Le Bouveur Eternal, the eternal drinker. But it was the last page that made her pause. Written in hurried, unfamiliar script, it read, "He returned once to fall. He will return again to rise. Do not speak his name unless you wish it answered." Beneath it, in faded ink, was a name scratched out, but as she rubbed gently with her glove, a single word reappeared. Fontanet. Adrienne turned toward the window. Across the street, in the gathering dusk, stood a tall man in a charcoal coat. Watching, he tipped his hat and vanished.